Good afternoon and welcome. My name is Father Matthew Carnes, and I'm an associate professor of government here at Georgetown University. I'm delighted to welcome you to this latest installment in our webinar series by the Center for Latin American Studies, in which I serve as the director, and the Latin American Leadership Program here at Georgetown University. We've titled the series, The Americas, Building the Future Together. And over recent and coming weeks, we're exploring the economic and political and social dynamics and implications of this moment in which we find ourselves throughout the hemisphere. The COVID-19 crisis, as you know, is affecting the world in unprecedented ways, stretching thin the resources of both the public and private sectors, and exposing long-standing tensions and growing edges of political and economic models. Latin America in particular has seen much of its hard-earned recent growth and democratization called into question. And the countries in the region have responded with a widely differing set of policy measures. This webinar series seeks to uncover trends and divergences across the region, aiming to explain and better understand the opportunities and best practices that can foster future growth and inclusion throughout the Americas. Now, today's installment focuses on fostering governance and the rule of law. And together with our panel, some really amazing public servants throughout the region, we'll be examining the political status quo, which has been disrupted in the region, and especially seeing how governments have sought to provide adequate healthcare, business, and employment support throughout the region. We'll give special emphasis to the ways that efforts to respond to the pandemic are affecting larger trends of democratic governance, corruption, and its alleviation, and citizen participation and protest. So without further ado, let me turn to our panelists who represent leadership at the national and local levels throughout the hemisphere, and each of whom deserves a far longer biography than I'll be able to give them today. Let me refer you to our website for fuller descriptions of all the things they've done in their lives. So with us today, we have Samuel Luis Navarro. He's the former Vice President and Foreign Minister of Panama, serving from 2004 to 2009 in that role. And he's a past chair of the Georgetown University Latin American Board, which advises the university's leadership in its engagement with the region. He served as a president of several large companies and on the board of 11 industrial, real estate, farming, and investment companies. And also, probably most importantly for us today, he's also a 1997 graduate of the Georgetown McDonough School of Business. Samuel, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next we have Maria Eugenia Maru Campos, who's serving in her second term as mayor of the city of Chihuahua, Mexico, the first woman ever elected to that position in the city's 300-year history. In the past, she served at the federal level in Mexico in the Ministry of the Interior, as deputy to the National Congress from 2006 to 2009, and as a representative of the city of Chihuahua to the Chihuahua State Congress. She also graduated from Georgetown in 2005 with a master's degree from the Center for Latin American Studies. Mario, welcome. And finally, Pamela Figueroa Rubio is a professor in the School of Humanities at the Universidad de Santiago de Chile. She heads the Studies Division of the Ministry of the Secretariat of the Presidency, and is a former member of the Political Reform and Transparency Agenda of the Chilean government from 2014 to 2018, and has later served as a member of the 2019-2020 Technical Advisory Committee for Chile's constituent process. She graduated from Georgetown University in 2001 with a master's degree from the Center for Latin American Studies. We are richly represented by Hoyas here with us today. Pamela, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the invitation.
It's wonderful to have you. So now we're going to turn to our panelists. Thank you again for joining us. Before I turn to them, though, let me just remind everyone who's watching with us that you can give us some questions, which our panelists will answer later in our discussion using the Q&A function through Zoom. So feel free as you're listening, if you have questions you'd like us to raise, please submit them there, and then I'll submit them to our panelists later in the conversation. But I'd like to begin first with Samuel and begin by posing sort of a basic question, but one that's very important to think about. And I'd ask you to comment on the reality of COVID-19 in your local context. How have you experienced this in Panama, in other countries in which you've been recently? And maybe what policies do you see being employed, and what have been promising, maybe what have been more challenging? So without further ado, Samuel, I'll turn to you.
Thank you very much, Matt. Let me start by saying that it's quite a privilege to be part of this webinar with you and with distinguished alumni like Pamela and Maru at Georgetown. I would like to start by putting a general framework of where we are today. This all started as a sanitary crisis. Came from nowhere. Nobody was expecting it. And it came with every consequence that we've seen. And this has turned into an economic crisis. Economic crisis in terms of macro and micro economies, not only in the countries, but individually. And at the same time, this turned then into a social crisis. Social crisis, people without jobs, people having to go to terrible sanitary situations in countries that had sanitary systems that were under par, to say the least. And then this turned into political challenges, not to say crisis yet. But there indeed is one of the big challenges that our societies in Latin America have. Let me say, this first has been much longer than anticipated, much deeper than anticipated, with catastrophic consequences in general areas. First, entrepreneurship has suffered tremendously. The middle class that has been built in many of these countries through many years and through economic growth that we've seen over the last 2 or 3 decades has been definitely hammered. And at the same time, the concentration of wealth between countries and also individuals in each one of the countries is going to be much greater, therefore generating greater inequities in each one of our countries. Having said all of that, what we've seen is that the pressure ends up at the governance in each one of the countries. Because no matter how good or how much you respond to a crisis that has all these elements, governments in general will be pressured by citizens, because there is no way that expectations can be met, not only on the sanitary part, where everyone is looking at the numbers every day to see how many new cases there are, how many unfortunate deaths there are. No matter how those numbers come out, they will always be dramatic. At the same time, the unemployment figures, if you see them up in the US, translated to everything that is happening in our region, is equally terrible. I would say even worse, because the way that the US can respond, or the developed world can respond, sometimes printing money or generating all these huge deficits, fiscal conditions in our countries will not allow this to be the quickest response. So citizens in general are going to be pressuring more and more into governments for greater participation. And I think that this is where you want to frame this discussion today, in which governments that were probably very ill prepared for a crisis, a sanitary crisis like this, governments that were probably very ill prepared in fiscal terms to respond to this economic situation, and with social conditions in most of the countries in very I would say, terrible situation. The authorities are into a very serious bind. Now, what has been responses that I think that are interesting? First, that I think that governments have been much more responsive to citizens' requests or pressures because social media. At the end of the day, the new element of social media being a communication channel for citizens' pressures and requests, I think has turned governments and officials at all the different levels much more responsive to those needs and those realities. This will, in turn, I think, generate much more transparency in the exercise of government authority. Not for any other reason that for citizens' participation. And one thing that is that is a phenomenon that we've seen here in Panama, and I'm sure that everyone has seen it everywhere else, is that when you have people locked up in their homes and with a computer, with internet, and with a cell phone, not having much more else to do, they will be much more involved in what transpires in the way we are being governed. So this is a phenomenon that I'm sure it has no way back after the crisis is dealt with. So generating much more participation in a much more active democratic processes.
Thank you very much, Samuel. And I like the way you pose that in terms of, this begins as a sanitary crisis, but then actually becomes something that exposes some of the deep questions about governance, and ultimately might be something that frees up or creates new pressures for social participation, especially with the media we have. That's a really helpful framing for us. Let's turn now to Maru. Let's turn to Maru and your experience on the ground. I know, Maru, you've been using social media, among other means, to try to reach your citizens and try to encourage them to participate both in the governance process, but also in dealing with the pandemic. So let's turn to your experience there in Chihuahua. Can you speak to us from that experience?
Thank you, Father. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your invitation. And I really want to say thank you to my colleagues and say hello to Samuel and to Pamela, and also to my class professor, which I think that it's listening to us, Angelo Rivero Santos, and to all the Georgetown community. Let me tell you that this was a challenge. I think it's a challenge for all the authorities, most of the authorities in the world. We are prepared as authorities to deal with public safety, to deal with any social problem, but we were not prepared at all for this pandemic. So it took us without any critical route, without any protocol, without any plan. So we use common sense. We tried to use public policy, but it was not the time to use public policy. It was an emergency, and so we had to use these ideas that. I'm sorry. I mean, as government, I believe that we represent a humanistic government, that we fight for the dignity of our citizens, and so that we cannot govern with certain ideas, but with public policy well designed and executed, and according to a serious analysis, and with the alliance with the society, with the productive sector and the academy. But by this time, responsible governments have been forced to make decisions on the go, observing the progress of crisis and taking the best possible path in each circumstance. So this was a very difficult time for authorities, and most of all for mayors, because we're the first hand of the people. We represent the first demand and needs of the people, and because people, they don't care about if it's a federal government issue or function. They just want solutions. They just want to be listened, and they just want solutions. So the first thing that we realized was to face that this was a great challenge, and it no longer matter what the limits of our responsibilities were as a local government. If nobody were doing anything or taking measures about this, we will have to take action as a local government. And we had to predict the worst case scenario and act on a preventive and contention basis. I read the other day the president of the US mayor, which is Rochester Hills, Michigan mayor. He pointed out recently, he said, as a mayor, you're a counselor, you're a helper, you're a healer, you're a visionary, and there's so much emotion and uncertainty in our communities right now, and the tremendous advantage that mayors have is that they have the public trust more so than any other level of governments. So we had clear that local government had to maintain public service working during the pandemic, during after that March 11, that the general director of the World Health Organization declared pandemic. So we had to maintain service, garbage collection, cleaning, sanitization, essential workers on the front line, tackling the COVID, like our police department, like firefighters, and provides those areas with enough supplies to service the city for several months. I asked for light plans, for example, for equipment, and of course, we motivate these workers on the front line. It was an emergency, and as a local government, we took it like a war. We took like everything, the productive sector is going to disappear, so we need to reserve food, and we need to have light plans, and we have to protect our people. And so we asked for a meeting for our municipal government that March 11 with our cabinet, and we took action to address that content. I'm sorry. First, we ensure the functioning of the government's essential duties, such as the public safety and the cleanliness of the city, but at the same time, we strengthen some areas to deal with the pandemic. We propose a legal reform in order to have legal validity through the digital platform Zoom. We could not stop the government agenda. So we had to have these sessions of the city council function through the Zoom or through the web seminar, and we send workers with vulnerable conditions to home. We create and promoted a sound communicational strategy to inform to the city what was going on and to prevent the contagious in the city. The government and myself had meetings with diverse sectors, with churches, with business, with groceries, with chambers of commerce, with restaurants, with organized society to inform what was going on and plan together how to deal with this situation. We had to face to this, and I don't know if other authorities face to this, because I think it was really interesting. We have to deal with this disjunction of whether we should invest in health, in food, in a food plan, or to contain the economic impact of the shutdown. And I think that was a great challenge for authorities, and most of all for local authorities. I remember Easter Sunday, I was really upset. I was really sad trying to take these hard decisions about the food plan, because you had a limited budget. So I received a call from the bishop, Chihuahua's bishop, and we cried together trying to decide. But he told me the first thing is to prevent hunger, and then health, and then the economic issue. But what I'm trying to say is the challenge that authorities face during this pandemic.
Thank you, Mauro. That's actually might be a great place to kind of move on, and then we'll come back, because we're going to make sure we have a couple rounds here, if you don't mind.
Sorry, I'm sorry. Thank you.
No, it's wonderful. And actually, I really want to emphasize the points you raised there about the ways that mayors are dealing with this on the front lines, and the different levels of conversation that's going on, and in the ways that populations often look directly to their own elected representatives at the mayoral level. That's so helpful for us to see, and the painful decisions that go into that. Samuel laid out some of the big issues around, do we invest in the economy? Do we invest in health? Do we invest in food, as you just said? And the way you have to make those decisions at the local level is just so pressing. So that's really nicely laid out. If you don't mind, let me move to Pamela, who can talk a little bit about, you mentioned too, the federal level, or thinking about government, how it fits together, the various pieces of governance. And Pamela, you've had some unique experience in these areas, working at the cabinet level, and then also thinking about the Constitution, ways people participate. So Pamela, could you share a bit of your perspective from Chile and your own experience?
Okay. First of all, thank you, Matt, and thank you to Georgetown to put together this conversation. It's a very pleasure to me to talk with Maru, with Samuel, and with you about this interesting topic that is politics in this uncertainty situation. Unfortunately, in Chile, the situation is very worrying. I think that we're the first or second worst case in Latin America because of the number of confirmed cases of COVID, the number of deaths. And so for me and for all the Chilean people, this is a very stressed situation. I was thinking about what Maru and Samuel were talking about, the role of government and role of society. In Chile, the situation is a little bit different because we have a central government, and the state is uncentralized. It's not federal like in other countries in Latin America. So with a very the hyper-presidential political system. So the role of the president of the country is very, very important. And the role of the mayors and the representative of local communities has been very contesting with the government. Because I think that, as Maru says, local governments can see the real problem of the people with this situation. The case of Chile is that we started the dynamic lockdown on March. The first case on Chile was on March 3rd, the first week of March. A young man that come from traveling from Asia. And so the COVID started and the rich level society. We have a great inequalities in the social, in Chile. So social inequality in Chile. So the pandemic started in the rich population. So at the first time, it looked at that the strategy of the government that was a dynamic and local lockdown in some communities, in some sector of the Santiago, it looks like it will be the best strategy. But in the short time, health specialists, the mayors, epidemiology started to question the strategy because it looks like it was not enough for the dimension of the problem of the COVID in Chile. So the medical community, El Colegio Médico, that it was the organization of the physicians in our country, especially from the university, and the mayors started to say to the government that we need another strategy, because as I think that it's happened in other countries in Latin America, the COVID spread from rich people to poor people, and because of the condition of the poor people, the COVID was very more hard to the poor communities. So we have now in a very problem that is different that it was in March. In March, the government had two strategies. First, I think that the government take first the economy than the health of the people. You know, the strategy of the government was to put the economy first, thinking that the spread of the COVID it would be, shorter than it was really now. So they put the focus on the test. We have a lot of tests in the first time, and then put the focus on hospitals. But they don't put focus on the social problem, as Samuel and Maru talk in the countries. So when the COVID spread and affect the poor people, the situation of inequality that is really, really important in Chile reveals a problem that it comes from, months ago, because the political issue in Chile is that the pandemic found this government in a profound political and social crisis. We have in October 2019, in the last year, we have large-scale social protests because of the inequality, because of social justice, because of gender issues and any other problems. And the government, it was in a very critical situation because of trust and legitimacy from the citizens. So when government find this health crisis because of the COVID, the government decide also declare a state of exception, estado de excepción in Chile. We have from March 18, curfew, toque de queda every night in Chile. So we are living, in a special situation that is not the same than in another countries. We have a dynamic lockdown because of the health crisis, and we also have a state of exception, a curfew, to keep the people in houses. But many people think that that decision is also to stop the protest that started in October 2019, and that was in a process of changes the constitution, in a new constitution process. So I think that the government feel overconfident at the first time on March and on May, and that it was very complicated for the political situation, because the opposition, the civil society, the scientific community feel like the strategic of the government, it was wrong, it was unsuccessful, and mayors and social and civil society are very upset with the decision from the central government. So, so from now, we are in a very special situation because the health situation is really bad. We have many cases. We have a problem with the trust of information because government, the government is not giving all the information that they have about the cases. We know the cases because of the social media, because of some things that are investigating about the cases. So the trust of government is very complicated about the information.
Pamela,
So
maybe that would be. Maybe that would be a good place for me to jump in, if you don't mind, to kind of keep us, you know, kind of we get. But if you want to finish, did you have one last thought there?
Sorry.
Actually, why don't I move forward just a little bit?
Okay.
This is really helpful. I think one of the things that I'm hearing as I listen to all three of you is the way that this has activated both citizens in their participation, often through social media or through conversations, you know, limited conversations, but conversations with those around them. It's activated local governments in really important ways. So mayors who have been the frontline responders in some ways, and of course, governors, and then of course, presidents for that matter. And I'm wondering about the tension between those. It's a piece that's come through in something each of you has said in some way, the levels of government and the ways those either work together or don't work together. And the ways, in a sense, that we use information and technology to communicate with citizens or communicate with other levels of government. So if you don't mind, maybe I'll come back to Mauro. If you, and Mauro, could you tell us a little bit about how you've been maybe to phrase this a certain way, managing up, sometimes speaking to either governors or, you know, the presidency, or managing down the way you speak to citizens. I know you've had a number of messages directly to your local citizens. I've seen some of those on the internet. So the ways that you're trying to build relations across levels of government, and including the citizenry, maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Father. Well, legally, federal and state government, they have the attribution about public health, about public policy on health. So we just have the data from them. We have just the diagnostic from them, but we have to deal with the local government by ourselves. I was elected as chairwoman of the National Conference of Municipalities of Mexico just 2 weeks before the pandemic began. So this conference brings together all the mayors of the country belonging to any party or any ideological issue, which means more than 2,000 cities in Mexico. So we have been in constant communication with all the mayors of the country, and one thing that I have learned is how the pandemic is suffered in other municipalities on the same way, no matter if it's the south or the north or how different they could be. And I can tell you that the same, that these local governments are dealing with the federal government, no matter if they are from the same political party, and they are dealing also with the state government. So it's very difficult to have an alliance, to have this coordination. And so we are trying to dealing by ourselves. The collection of taxes that we have as local government have diminished 40%. The federal government help that by law has to give to the local governments have diminished 40%. So it has it demands for us a lot of creativity and innovation, and also an alliance with other sectors like the private sector and the civic society organizations in order to deal with the pandemic. So I think that this issue has obligate us to make more agreements, which strengthen democracy, which strengthen institutions, and look less to politics. So I think that's a good thing for us.
That's incredibly helpful. And I think it raises us to this level of thinking about democracy and how democracy functions. And often we think about that being, the ways we do that through elections, sometimes through political parties. And you're saying a crucial element of democracy is the way the levels of government coordinate with each other and build relationships. Yes. And maybe that's something that, constitutions didn't pay as much attention to, but now we're seeing that. So Pamela, as you're working on that discussion about a new constitution in Chile, or the consideration, the possibility of a new constitution, how do you think about this, about the ways that, government can relate, whether it's the central government with provincial governments or with, local governments? How do you think about that?
Yeah, that is a very challenging Chile because, as I said, we have a very centralized state. And the local government, and we have the centralized state and the local governments that were elected. But in the regions, that is the middle, state, the leaders are nominated by the president. And we are now in a reform that we are going to have for the first time a direct elections of the governors. Yeah, that would be a really, important reform in Chile. It's supposed to be in the next elections, but it's also going to be an issue to discuss in the constitution process. I just want to say something about the constitution process. The constitution process in Chile started in 2015 with the leadership of the Presidenta Michelle Bachelet. And I worked in her government, designing a very different methodology to build a new constitution. Because Presidenta Bachelet wanted a participatory process. So in 2016, we have a very innovative participatory process to build a new constitution. People participated in all the country, around the world. Chileans people living in other countries could also participate. And in that participatory process, we have a very important level of participation from the people in a methodology, what we call like something like deliberative democracy. It's another form, another mechanism to participate in the democracy. And with all that information, President Bachelet sent a reform to the Congress and a project of a new constitution. But we have presidential elections in 2017, and a new government, that is the actual government, the government of the Presidente Sebastián Piñera, he decided to suspend the constitutional process on March 2018 because he's a right-wing government, it's a different government coalition, so he decided another agenda. But in 2019, as I told you, we have a very large-scale social protest, and people asked for a new constitution. Because of that protest, the Congress and the principal political parties that have a representation in the Congress decide to change the constitution to plans an itinerario and a path to a new constitution. So it's supposed that we had that national plebiscite for a new constitution on April 26th, that it had to be suspended because of the pandemic. So I think that is a very challenge now. We can talk about that further in this conversation, that we have to think how to to make elections in this new scenario, because the national plebiscite that it was planned for April 26th it has been changed to October 25, yeah, in a couple of months because of the COVID. And I think that is a very challenge for Chile, and I think for all Latin America and maybe the world, think in this kind of mechanisms to discuss which are the major social, economic, and political problems of a society. Chile was always looks like a very stable country, a very democratic country, and observed. I remember when I studied at Georgetown in 2001, all the people say Chile is an example. Chile is a very democratic, very institutionalized, but I understand why the people, it looks like very suppressive because of the crisis now in Chile. But I think that the crisis is for a problem that Samuel and Maru and Matt talk, that is a very deep social inequality that exists in Chile. And the pandemic is like an example that how can this kind of problems that are global, like reverse all that inequalities and make more difficult for the the political system that we have now is not enough. And decentralization and the new role of mayor and new role of governors, it could be a very, very important topic. I think that we are also talking about the role of the president and the Congress, because as in other Latin American countries, we have a president that is very strong, a Congress that is not so strong as the president. So it's very difficult to resolve political problems when the president has no support from the citizen. That is a problem in Chile today. And we also need to talk about the political system, to change some attributions of the president, to make the Congress strong. And I think that is very important, give the citizens some mechanism of participation institutionalized in the system, not just in protest, not just in the local government. We need to include the people in the political system as a mechanism permanent of the resolution conflict.
Thank you, that's so helpful. And I really love where our conversation has gone, because it's both got us to think about local governments, the levels of government, but ultimately about how democracy evolves. How does democracy keep growing? When I first started studying the region back at the end of the 1980s and early 1990s, we sort of naively thought that democracy, once you had a constitution that was democratic, it would just kind of run itself. And we're actually finding that democracy needs to keep reforming itself. And maybe to do that in a way where it can address some of the deep underlying problems, social problems, citizen participation problems, levels of government, and which is most adequate to different situations. So let me come back to Samuel and ask, you can feel free to respond to many of the ideas that you've already heard, but maybe thinking about that large question about how democracy evolves and maybe where you see it evolving through this crisis these days.
One of the things, Matt, that comes to light in a crisis like this is the need for political reform in all the countries in Latin America. We've gone through significant and substantial economic reforms over the last 3-4 decades in all the countries, one way or the other. And this has actually triggered economic growth in general. So let me, I get up. Okay, this has triggered a economic growth in many countries. Economic growth that in some cases has increased the levels of inequality because it has not been a part of a greater reform process. Now, as Pamela was saying, this took most or many of our countries with weak governments already. Governments that were based on a worn out democratic structure already, where because of the new ways of citizens communicating and the new ways of citizens requiring to be listened, were not being addressed. And I'm very happy, and I commend Maru for taking over at the local level when the national governments have lacked in their response. And this is the type of new leadership that I think that we're going to be seeing everywhere. And in that political reform, what I foresee is a whole new social pact in which citizens are much more involved in their decision making, and that decentralization of the powers of these almighty powerful presidents that we've had in Latin America comes down to how the local governments can solve people's problems. We're going to get over this. We're going to get over this. And when we get through this, societies are going to be much demanding. They are going to require more transparency, and they're going to require and push for more participation. So in that sense, I think that democracies will have to adjust to that reality and become stronger and, I would say, modern and newer democratic political structures, as opposed to this old type of big elephants trying to be moved by political forces. And having said that, I would foresee, and I'm optimistic in the sense that I foresee in the next round of elections, of democratic elections in different countries, I foresee new types of leadership, younger, more dynamic, more participating, and sometimes you would even say unorthodox, thinking outside of the box to address the needs of that population that having suffered inequities for so long had not been heard, but now are visible because of the pandemic.
Thank you. That's a wonderfully optimistic view. And I love the idea of thinking about what would a new social pact look like, and this idea of maybe unorthodox solutions. And I don't know if everyone can see, but I can see the participants. I saw Maru nodding her head, very much agreeing with that. Maru, would you like to speak about that a little bit, about what you would see in sort of this new generation of leadership and what might be provoked by the pandemic?
Yeah, for sure. I really agree for what Joe Samuel said about Latin America has a lot of history about presidential systems, concentration of power, and now it seems that this social pact has motivated us to participate from bottom to top and to make this political system from the citizens, from the local governments to the federal government to solve problems. And maybe it's a fact issue, but it is. So about about the social pact, we have seen here in Chihuahua the the Chihuahuan case, we have seen a lot of solidarity. We have seen a lot of generosity from people, participation. They organize by themselves. I don't have to be over them in order to organize. They organize themselves. So they are representing values of democracy since the pandemic began. And so I hope that that we can maintain that social pact, because I think that citizens understood that a government cannot by itself, that they have to be involved, and that that it's more it's a better thing. It's to multiply efforts. If we have, for example, this quadruple propeller, which involves the academy, the civic society organizations, the productive sector, and the government working together. So we have seen already these benefits, and I hope to maintain it. It's a great lesson.
That's very helpful. Yeah, that's wonderful. And actually it reminds me of, it's interesting, again, thinking about the last 30 or 40 years in the region, how sometimes public and private were played off against each other. And now in everything I'm hearing from all of you, we really see how these fit together. And in fact, how academia is part of that, civil society is part of that. And maybe that's a building of a new, more robust kind of democracy, one that actually has deeper roots in multiple sectors of society. Pamela, would you want to speak to that at all? Just a little bit about maybe the sectors you see coming together and maybe how they're contributing to the process in Chile today.
Oh yeah, I see that I really agree with say Samuel and Maru, because of the new talents of the society, how to include the society and other sectors, as you say. I was thinking about the process that Chile lives in the last year because of the protests and the demands and all the new agenda that the civil society put on the table, For example, gender issues. Last year it was very, very important. And that's the reason why is that people vote for approve the idea of a new constitution. We could have for the first time in history in Chile and maybe in the world, a conventional constitutional convention, it's like the Constitutional Assembly in Chile, that it will be with a gender parity. 50% of men, 50% of women. That is a very important issue. So gender is a topic that comes from the society, from these new social sectors. And another issue is indigenous people. That in Chile it was is an issue that is put aside for a long time. So that I think is another topic to talk about in this new process. Environment also, all the topics about environment, social justice, even racism, because of the migration and everything, is some topics are topics that coming from these new social demands, as we were talking in this conversation, and also I think that the middle sectors on Chile are very worried about the economic situation. So I think that it will be a focus too. And I want to put other issue that I was thinking when Maru and Samuel talk about the challenge of democracy, because when we are living now a crisis that is global, it looks like the new problems for democracy are not only local problems, but are global problems too. For example, this pandemic or other issues about, I was thinking problems of organized crime or issues like that that we live in Latin America. So we also must think about the global level of democracy, the cooperation, because the first response of the states to this pandemic, it was closed borders. And the response was as national state level with borders closed. And we know that we need the cooperation with other societies, with other countries. We need to collaborate at the global level, regional level too. So I think that the challenge for the new democracy or to strengthen democracy, it must be cooperation, participation, inclusion at different levels, at local levels and the national level and the global level. And I think that we have to build an agenda with that kind of issues. We cannot have democracy without participation of people, without new mechanisms of deliberation. Because of the history of Latin America that as we say, is very presidentialist, focus on political parties that now are weaker than ever. Yeah, political parties is a really challenge in Latin America. We need to build strength political parties. We can, put aside that issue. And we need to be creative, innovative in thinking about participation mechanisms and deliberation mechanisms. We know that democracy means representation, but it also means participation and deliberation from the people that is very active now in all the countries.
Thank you so much. That's a vision that I think touches on several different levels, and one that I really appreciate that you mentioned there, because it's come in a couple of the questions, was about the regional cooperation and maybe even thinking about the global. How have other global powers affected the response within the region? And especially this tension between, many countries basically closed down, and shut their borders, when actually this is a moment when maybe more collaboration is really most needed, especially because we're all fighting the same enemy here in this disease. It's something that's truly global. So I appreciate you touching on that a bit here. Now, we are coming under time pressure now. We try to keep these to just 1 hour. We find that they're the most effective when people can get one really good quality hour. So I do want to move us towards a closure. And all of you had an experience of being at Georgetown University. All of you were students here at some point. Could you maybe give us one last thought that you would, if you were going to encourage students coming to Georgetown today, and they wanted to serve in the ways you've served in the region, making a difference, an impact on the ground, could you just say one thing, just 1 minute long, just here's something I would suggest a student really, focus on or specialize in during their time so they can respond creatively in building this new kind of robust democracy you've all been speaking about. Why don't I start with Samuel? What would you suggest?
Thank you, Matt. Indeed, you mentioned it, the role of academia. I think that, and as we've discussed in the board, in the Latin American board in many occasions, I think that academia has a huge opportunity today. And Georgetown and the network of Jesuit universities in Latin America, with the credibility and the capacity to study these challenges and put together a game plan. I think that this is a great opportunity, and for students and for younger generation leaders coming to different universities, Georgetown, one of them. This is a great opportunity to interact with teachers and other experienced individuals in designing the new democratic model. This is not going to be overnight. This is going to go through some struggles. I mean, we already see all these failed democracies in the region. I'm not going to single out any country, but there's some failed democracies. So I think that this is going to be a turnaround over the next few years, where academia can play a huge role.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I'll turn next to Maru. So would you like to maybe speak a word to our students or to those that will be coming through to eventually fill a role like yours?
Thank you. Well, I would say that being at Georgetown is a really blessing to have those teachers, to have all that technical preparation for life. I would say I will be idealistic, and I would say that after being at Georgetown or preparing at Georgetown means to don't forget to go back to your city or to your country to support your people. It's the meaning of what why we study an MPP or an MBA is not for ourselves, but it's for the common wellness and for the common benefits of our people.
Thank you so much. And yes, the common good is such an important motivator and something we really do try to inculcate in our students at Georgetown. Thank you for that. And Pamela, what message would you give?
I agree that my experience in Georgetown was wonderful, not just because of the knowledge. I think that much because of the people that I knew there. And Georgetown have three things that are very important: social compromise, leadership, and liberty to think new paths, new way to think the things. And in Latin America, I'm sure that we need new forms of strong democracy and a new social and economic model. And for that, I think that we need to go back to history to think a new alternative for the future. I remember that I studied a lot of Latin American history in Georgetown, and I learned a lot about what we can do, what we do well and not. You can learn from the best and for the worst. And from that history, we have to think new ways to think, new way to strengthen democracy. And students have the challenge to think about the new paths, the new ways, and I think that that's Georgetown can do, putting together all the different actors from Latin America.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Maru, Pamela, Samuel, thank you for joining us today. Thank you for your insight, for this really rich conversation. I loved the way it touched on so many crucial issues in the region. Those that are pressing because of the pandemic today, but ones that are long-term: social and economic participation, growth, democracy. I could almost use this in my class, so I'm very grateful for that. I may want to make my students watch it this coming year. I'm also thankful for the ways that you embody what we hope out of a Georgetown education, which is a deep commitment to serving the common good, of serving your local communities, your national communities, and helping us think about the global commitment that we need to have as well. You're wonderful representatives of Georgetown, and we're just very grateful for your time with us. Let me say finally, thank you to everyone who's joined us on this webinar today. We hope you've enjoyed it. We hope you'll join us in a few weeks. We'll have another one of these on the social and cultural impacts of the pandemic in the region. We'll have a fascinating group of folks working in the arts and in social movements throughout the region, so please pay attention for that. And then do keep your eyes tuned on Georgetown. We have some exciting things coming out of our Latin American Leadership Program, our Center for Latin American Studies, and lots of our collaborators throughout the university. So thank you for being with us today. Stay safe, stay healthy, and stay in touch. Thank you very much.